interviewed Dave Fleming in 1905. This is his recollections of Clifton Branham, the last man to hang in Wise County, for the murder of his wife Nancy Branham. Dave himself had been on the end of a bullet from Clifton, but survived to tell the tale. Here's his story.
You asked me about Clifton Branham? I'll tell you, he was a mean, evil man. Tales I heard about him said he was ruthless and that he had killed a lot of people. He was said to be a feudist and moonshiner. Ida told me that he was no account. He was gone a lot afore he got sent to the pen for killing old Henry Vanover. She said she didn't much remember him, 'cause he was gone when she was just 6 years old. Anyways, he spent over 14 years in the pen afore the parole law came into effect, and my Uncle Billy and the warden got him out. I didn't know him, but when he got home, I wanted to meet him since I done married his daughter. I wanted to get off on the right foot with him. He sent word for us to come over to Wib Branham's for a visit. When we got there, I saw my Uncle Billy on the porch, so Ida and me stayed by the road. There was bad blood betwixt Billy and us. I sent Ida up to the house to ask Clifton to come out to the road so's we could talk. He wouldn't come. Seems Lizzie had told him some things, and Nan said he accused her of putting Liz and me together. Anyways, I could see right then that he was not going to accept me as his kin. When Nan came back with Ida, she said that Liz was going to stay there with them. Clifton was going to raise her right, whatever that meant. We left and went home, 'cause it was getting late in the evening. I went over to Clintwood 3 days before Christmas to see some friends. One of them told me that Clifton had been over there just a day afore me and was talking with some people who I knowed were enemies of mine. He thought they was up to no good. He told me to watch him close, 'cause he was a dangerous man. As fate would have it, I happened to see Clifton with Liz on his horse riding back to the Mill Creek Road. I decided to ride up to them and confront Clifton once and for all. When I did catch them, Clifton slowed up his horse and told me to go on ahead, that he didn't want to travel with me. After what my friend told me, I didn't trust him, and I told him that I would ride with them. I told him that I thought he wanted to shoot me in the back. He said I was a fool for thinking that. He said he wouldn't hurt me for $1,000. I knowed right then that he for sure had made some kind of deal with my enemies, and the fat was in the fire. I told him that it would do him no good to try, and I pulled out my gun, but afore I could even get it cocked, he had his out and shoved in my face, and he was cocking it when I tried to push it away from my face. Next thing I knowed, I was on the ground. He had shot me in the head, but luckily I had pushed his gun up, so that the bullet only caught the top of my forehead. Next thing I knowed, Ida was just a-screaming at the top of her lungs, just a-cussing Clifton. She thought he had killed me ashore. She had come up when she heard us on the road above the house. She was trying to wipe the blood off my face and out of my eyes. About the time she got my eyes cleared, she helped me to my feet. I looked around for my horse. That was when we heard some more yelling, just around the bend in the road. Nan had come out and confronted Clifton and Liz. I don't know all of what was said, I just heard Nan yelling. Next thing I heard was gunshots. Ida and me got my horse and went down the road where we found Nan shot to death. She was just lying in the road with her dress afire, not moving or breathing. He had done killed her. Clifton and Liz was done gone when we got there. Lee Greer heard the commotion and come around to see what was going on. When he got there, he helped us get the door off the cabin and put Nan on it to take her in the house. We buried her the next day. Clifton had taken Liz over in Kentucky to Uncle Dick's in 3 Mile. They said he left her there and took off to Floyd County, where he stayed a while afore he killed another man there, married another girl, and was on his way to Michigan a few months later when they caught him. They brought him to Wise for trial on killing Nan. Ida had tried to warn me about him. I thought I was smarter and tougher than him. Turned out that he was a lot smarter and tougher than I thought. I was lucky to be alive. If I hadn't hit his gun, I'd be a dead man. Anyways, they found him guilty and sentenced him to hang. They never tried him for that feller he killed in Floyd County. Guess that don't matter, 'cause they strung him up, and I was happy to hear the trap sprung. We was all kind of edgy for a few days after the hanging, 'cause Clifton said he was going to be raised from the dead in 3 days, so we was watching for him, but he never did come back. That ended his story. He wanted to kill me, but the rope killed him first. I got the last laugh.
The landlord and neighbor of Nancy Branham was Leeland Greer. He was one of the first to get to Nancy after she was shot by Clifton. He gives us his account of the murder and attempted murder on the Mill Creek Road.
I don't remember Clifton much. He was in prison when Nan rented the house I had on my property. She lived there with her daughters, Liz and Ida, a son-in-law, Dave Fleming, and her son George, who was there only sometimes. They were no trouble to me, and always had the rent paid. It was a few days before Christmas, in 1902, when I was out in the barn, and I heard a shot that sounded pretty close. Didn't think much of it at the time. There was always someone hunting around there. It wasn't until I heard a woman screaming at the top of her lungs that I thought something was amiss. I started back down towards the house, and I could hear a voice coming from the road. By the time I got to the house, I heard a woman that turned out to be Nan yelling something while the screaming continued from up the ridge. Next thing I knew, I heard a series of shots, maybe 4 or 5. I went on down the road towards where Nan and them lived. Ida and Dave were coming down from the ridge, and Dave was bleeding from his head. I saw Nan just lying in the road. Her dress was smoldering, and she wasn't moving. I got there right after Ida and Dave. They said that Clifton had shot Dave and had come down here and shot Nan. She was clearly dead, shot through the neck and several times in the chest. I went over to the cabin and took the door off and brought it back, and we loaded Nan on it. I helped them carry her into the Whitaker house to prepare her for burial. Dave was still somewhat wobbly. He had a gunshot in the top of his forehead, but it was more of a grazing shot than a direct hit. Ida was almost hysterical from this whole affair. I can see why. It was disturbing to me just to see it. She was crying and screaming that Clifton had killed her mom, and that Liz was with him on the horse when he'd done it. Dave recovered in just a few days, but had his head in a bandage for a week at least. I helped Ida gather up stuff and sell it to raise a reward for the capture of Clifton. I was questioned by the sheriff. I told them I hadn't seen the actual killing, only her body. I had heard that Dave and Clifton got into it, and that Nan got between them to prevent a fight, and Clifton shot her. But Ida told a different story when I asked her what happened. She said that Dave and Clifton got into it up the road, and Clifton shot him. Then she said Clifton went on down the road with Liz, and Nan came out and confronted him, and he shot her there in the fork of the road, left her lying there, and they took off.
He also related his account of attending the trial with John Branham, Clifton's father. Mr. Greer also tells about his witnessing the execution and some events that followed it.
They caught up with Clifton over in Kentucky a few months later and brought him back to Wise for his trial. His father, Johnny, and me attended the trial. When they brought Clifton in the courtroom, he was pretty contrary. He didn't have a single witness in his defense, but the prosecution had plenty. When it came time for his defense, he was the only witness, and he just sassed the court, the prosecutor, and even his own lawyers. I felt sorry for old Johnny. I know that had to be hard. His sister Polly really took it hard when they found him guilty, and he was sentenced to hang. She was with him in the jailhouse when he gave a perfervid speech about being an innocent man and that Nan was assaulting him with a rock. He asked the crowd gathered to watch him go up the gallows if they thought he was justified. Not that it would make any difference. He was already sentenced, and the governor would not stay his execution. Maybe he thought if he incited the crowd, he would be rescued. I don't know. Before he ascended the gallows, he played a couple of pieces on the guitar. They left him hanging after the trap was sprung for nearly half an hour to make sure he was dead. Most of the crowd was still there until they cut him down. Old Johnny had left before he went up the gallows. He said he didn't want to see it. Cant says I blame him. Polly was the first one to him when they cut him down, and she was just a-bawling. Her husband, Henry, had a wagon loaded up with his coffin and took him off to George's Fork for the wake. They buried him 3 days later. He had said he would rise from the dead, but he didn't. Just another deranged individual. Doc Taylor had said the same thing 10 years before him, and he didn't come back either.
I sat down with one of Clifton's attorneys, J.F. Alley. He stated that Clifton was reluctant to cooperate with them in formulating a defense. He said Clifton was very difficult and completely contrary about even making a plea with the state's attorney.
Clifton Branham? Oh, yeah, I remember him. That was one of the worst cases I was ever involved with. I was one of 3 counselors appointed to represent Clifton. From the start, we didn't have much to base a defense upon. Clifton didn't help much. He always acted contrary and challenged us with everything and every method of defense we came up with. We had no choice but to put him on the stand, and instead of being an asset to the case, he pretty much sank it. We tried to find a character witness for him, but there was no one who could testify to anything that would help him. It only took the jury an hour to come up with a guilty verdict. Fastest deliberation I've ever seen.
I also got to sit down with J.A. Hughes, another of Clifton's public defenders. Mr. Hughes shared much of the same information about Clifton that Mr. Alley did, corroborating his statements. Unfortunately, R.P. Bruce was deceased by the time I got to these interviews.
I was a public defender when Clifton was brought in. Judge Matthews appointed me and R.P. Bruce and J.F. Alley to represent him. I must say, that was the worst case I ever handled. I can't talk a lot about it because of attorney-client privileges and all, so I'll just say Clifton made it very hard to defend him. I do think that he fully expected to be acquitted, but he really had no defense that we could establish, and he didn't make it easy when we questioned him on the stand. Jury came back pretty quick with a guilty verdict. Judge Matthews ordered him hung. We filed the regular appeal process, but it was denied, and the conviction was upheld at the state appeals court.
The Honorable W.S. Matthews was the presiding judge in Clifton's case. He said he remembered this case very well, as it was one of the most open and shut cases he had ever tried.
There are a few cases that came before me that were so open and shut. In the case of Clifton Branham, it was pretty clear from the beginning of the judicial process that he had no real defense. He made it abundantly clear by his behavior that the jury would have no trouble in discerning the outcome of this trial. The prosecutor had little trouble producing enough damning evidence that his only recourse was to make up a self-defense claim, which was easily discredited by the prosecution. His claim of verbal assault and libelous accusations hardly warrant the wanton act of murder committed by this defendant. The jury saw through his weak claims and found him guilty of murder. Given the testimony of the witnesses for the prosecution, plus the disposition of the defendant in the courtroom and on the stand, there was but one verdict that could have been reached and only one sentence that would be just in this case. When testimony was given before the sentencing phase, his past criminal conviction and disposition to the taking of human life, I had no real choice but to give him the death sentence. He would hang in 30 days. This would give the defense time to appeal the case, but it was upheld in the appeal process.
I have more interviews coming soon. The series on Clifton Branham will continue. I'm Chris Blevins for the Wise News.